Stats. Welcome to the podcast you've been waiting for. Great perspective and exclusive interviews.
It's a hard job for those guys because it's happening fast.
The kind of Saints insight and fun commentary you won't get anywhere else.
We've got plenty of technology to speed things up.
It's time to kick off your Been There, Done That Saints podcast, where we hand it off to our host, Mike Nabors, and Super Bowl winning linebacker, Scott Shanle.
Proud of these guys. Mind you, we also signed in free agency Scott Fajita. He came with, we knew each other. Mark Semino, we acquired a week before the season. Scott Shanle, Drew Brees. That's a pretty good group of free agents.
And we have one of those free agents as a co-host on our own podcast. It's the Postmortem to Sean Payton, the End of an Era Done Dat podcast, everybody. Welcome in. 92 minutes for Sean Payton, 33 minutes with an opening statement. I love the fact, as I bring in partner Scott Shanle and producer Justin Thomas, Shanle, we're going to get into so much Sean Payton, but he mentioned you, my friend, before Drew Brees in his closing presser. Has to be a career highlight.
What an honor. They say you save the best for last, right? I'll take being second. I'll take runner-up to Drew Brees. Appreciate the shout-out, Coach.
Justin, how proud of you that Shanle, you're watching the final presser. We knew Shanle would get a shout-out there.
It's funny you say that, Mike, because I was waiting for Scott's name to come up. He started mentioning the free agents. I'm like, I know Scott Shanley's going to be somewhere in there.
Shanley's also a Dallas native. We're going to get into those rumors about eventually Sean Payton will be the head coach of those Cowboys. So much to talk about in the wild career of Sean Payton. You know what? I've talked a lot about Sean Payton on our Your View network, different media outlets. And Shanle, my big takeaway is, I was amazed what Sean Payton did in New Orleans, but when you really reflect on the past 16 years, I'm even more amazed. What he did coming in, the time that he did, just establishing how offenses are played in the record books and what he did for Drew Brees, and then really what he did without Drew Brees the last season. I'm even kind of more amazed as we look back at his career.
Yeah, for sure. When you're going through it, you don't really appreciate things until it's done, until it's over, until it's done. And I feel the same way as a player. When I'm going through, and I was fortunate enough to play for 10 years, I didn't reflect. I didn't do I was trying to constantly live in the present, look at the future, where I was going. And then when I was done, I sat there and I was like, man, it's pretty cool. Walk on at Nebraska, played 8-man high school football, 7th round draft pick. Like, you sit there and reflect. And so now that Coach Payton, he had that press conference, so you start to reflect on just how cool it was and how important he was to the New Orleans Saints and to New Orleans and to Louisiana at the exact right time. Like, it's a storybook, and it's almost too good to be true. But, we all want Coach Payton to stick around forever. And you knew this day was going to come. Unfortunately, it came sooner than a lot of us expected. He's going to be in Canton. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, we're going to get to that later. I don't want to break any news here, but more likely we're going to talk about that. And I have a stat of a similar coach who's in the Hall of Fame right now that really shows a great case for Sean Payton. But Justin, just raw, I didn't ask you about this. I like the podcast that we talk a little bit, but I like to surprise you guys. There's more raw answers here. But when you think of Sean Payton as somebody who grew up in New Orleans, unlike Shanle and I, you saw some bad years. What stands out about Sean Payton for you, just looking back at his career?
In 2006, if you were to told me, hey, we're having a new head coach come in, he's not only going to turn around this organization, he's going to bring a Super Bowl to an organization. I don't think anyone, probably most fans would have laughed in your face. I just can't, I don't know. It's hard to explain, like, how appreciative as a fan I am of what Sean was able to do, how he was able to turn around the organization, make the organization a place that players wanted to play at. I mean, like you said, Mike, for the longest time, New Orleans was seen as a laughingstock. So it just brings a lot of pride to me, and and for how I feel about the organization. I'm just very thankful.
Shanle, were you surprised?
No, I was shocked. I really was, especially with the type of season they had last year, everything they were able to overcome. I didn't know last season wore on Sean the way he alluded it did. I did mention to people as I watched him on the sideline last year that he wasn't the same coach. I didn't see the running up and down the sideline. I didn't see the fist pumps, the Tiger Woods fist pump, the yelling over the other sideline. And so when I did see that, I did start to worry, like maybe he was feeling a little fatigued and burnt out from it all. But I had a lot of emotions: shocked first, then sad. Like what's the future going to look like? Scared, maybe should be tied into that with what the future is going to look like. But I think going to what Justin was kind of saying about Coach Payton, what he meant to the place, and you reflect and you think back to how he incorporated what we were playing for when we first got there. A lot of people don't know that before we played the Atlanta Falcons on Monday Night Football, we practiced in the dome. And at the end of practice, we take a knee, coach talks to us, and you get up and you go shower. Well, we take a knee and the lights cut off in the dome, and on the new big screen comes up and it's a video of New Orleans, and it's showing the city during the hurricane, the flood, the waters, how high they were, the dome, people going into the dome, carrying their kids, carrying their babies, trying to keep them out of the water. And at the end of it, he's like, if you guys think tonight's game or tomorrow's game is just another game, you're wrong. And he told us how much it was going to mean. And he embraced what we were all playing for. And so it was always more than football. And to that point, growing up and living there, having 2 of my 3 kids born there, having my oldest go to school, and seeing what a win on Sunday brought to that community versus a loss was unbelievable. We lose a game and people were, hey, good luck next week, and just head down, sad. We win a game and the bright light, the spirit of people came out, and I'm like, man, how lucky are we to play for a place that cares about what we do? Because there's a lot of professional organizations. You look at the LA teams that don't even show up for their teams unless they're in the playoffs. Like, we are blessed to play for blue collar people that love their Saints, and it was just a special feeling. We were all blessed and lucky to play there.
But Shanle, with that said, I thought it was interesting. Payton was so good, I thought, in so many ways at his closing press conference. That was the real Sean Payton. I mean, Sean Payton a lot of times snaps at the media, snaps at his staff, snaps at at people inside that building. But a part of that is his job as a head coach. But that was the real Sean Payton in a lot of ways, an authentic Sean Payton at that press conference. But everything you said though about joining that team in 2006, I thought something interesting that he said in the press conference is we weren't allowed to use the K word, Katrina, because you didn't want to use that as an excuse. So you had an appreciation on one side of what New Orleans went through and the game and returning to the Superdome, but you also didn't want to use that as an excuse. That was part of it too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we were all grateful for what we were able to play football. We were able to get paid to play football, no matter win or lose, what was going on in our lives. And you were still seeing a city recovering. You were seeing homes being gutted still. You were seeing drywall stacked up. You were seeing restaurants not open. Like, it allowed you to have perspective as a professional athlete. Like, man, no matter what happens to me, these people have it way worse than I do. And then to see us build that organization and to see right along with us as we built a football team, people were rebuilding their homes, rebuilding their businesses. It was awesome. It was hand in hand. It was together. That tie into the city was so strong. And like I said, that doesn't happen without Coach Payton making us realize just how special that bond was.
Okay, we're going to talk about Payton a lot, but to me, something that really wasn't talked about was exactly why he left. He gave family reasons. He needs time away. But what is next for Sean Payton? Here's what he said at the press conference.
Honestly, as I sit here today, and this is okay, I don't know what's next. And look, I read the reports and I understand. I've not spoken to anyone from a media outlet relative to doing television or radio. Maybe that opportunity arises, but every time I read something that says like he's in line for this job, I'll call my agent Don and I'll say, Don, did you hear something? Because I have not heard anything.
All right, the cynics out there, or maybe they call themselves the realists, say, yeah. He's definitely going to go to the Cowboys in time. You live in Dallas, Scott Shanle. You could probably jump in the car. It takes you about 15 minutes to get to the facility. I know there's buzz in Dallas. Do you think eventually he's going to Dallas, or can we even talk about that at this point?
I'll tell you what, Mike. I'm sitting there watching Coach Payton's farewell press conference, and all these Dallas Cowboys are just salivating, just like a dog with a steak hanging out there. National media, they're on ESPN, they're everywhere, begging for our coach, who's just announced he's burned out. They want him so bad. It was groveling. It was disgusting. And there's a part of me, like the jealousy is coming out like, no, coach, go do media, go talk on TV, go do Monday Night Football, go take over for Troy Aikman, but don't reward these beggars. Like, you're our coach. So that part of me was strong yesterday. I said I had a lot of emotions. Dallas Cowboys have been clamoring for Sean Payton since 2006, since we waxed him on a Sunday Night Football game, and they thought, how do we let this guy get out of the line? Every year, Sean Payton is going to be their head coach. I don't know if it's going to happen. Part of me doesn't want it to happen. But like you said, I'm close to the facility. Sean Payton being close, that part of me would love it. I don't want to reward Cowboys fans who have been groveling for years for our coach to be rewarded.
All right, I go back to this, though. We're going to get into who's going to replace Sean Payton. But my thing is, you can have, and I say Dennis Allen's going to, and Pete Carmichael could be the offensive coordinator, but you're never going to replace Sean Payton, what he meant. And inside that building, the Saints complex, I know this. You know this. There's a fear factor of Sean Payton. He controls everything in that building. He does. I know Mickey Loomis is the general manager, but Sean Payton is the alpha dog in that building. He may come in there and say, I want the temperature to be 58 degrees all day, all week. That wouldn't surprise me. You're not going to replace that. And he's used to being in control, Shanle. How is that going to work if he goes to Dallas when Jerry's the alpha there?
Well, I think the understanding has to be, Jerry, you want me? And Jerry's going to compensate him. It's going to be the highest. It's going to be the richest NFL coaching contract ever. And there's going to be terms, just like Bill Parcells gave Jerry terms. I was here when Bill was here. And the terms that Bill gave Jerry on his jet before he signed the papers was, if I'm going to coach your team, you're going to stay the hell out of my way. And so everybody sees Jerry Jones. And this team that plays now for Dallas, Jerry Jones is like their grandfather. He talks to them all the time. He's in the meetings. He's at practice. I hardly ever saw Jerry. Jerry spoke to our team one time in almost 3 years. He was never on the sideline once. And so I think the same type of relationship will have to be bargained out before a contract is signed. I think the one thing about the Dallas Cowboys, you say they haven't won a Super Bowl, they haven't won any playoff games. They've done a decent job of drafting players. I mean, they've had some really good players. Jerry Jones and his son have done that. So I don't know just how far Sean would go in terms of how much power he would get when it comes to drafting, signing free agents, or if he would just be happy with working with what they have.
Jimmy Johnson's a good friend of Sean Payton's. Bill Parcells is. I can only imagine the conversations that would take place behind the scenes there, because they're going to tell him some stuff, Shanle.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, Jimmy is going to say, now, listen, I know the money is good.
Yeah.
But here's the other thing. I talk about the money, but let's not lose sight of the fact that Tony Romo is making tons of money calling games. Sean Payton can make just as much as Tony Romo. Sean Payton can make more sitting on Monday Night Football or Thursday where Aikman was. He can make more doing that than coaching football. And it's a heck of a lot easier. And so part of me, everybody just assumes he's coming back to coaching. I don't. I would rate it 50-50, really, because I think once he got into that world and the compensation is going to be more than he would make as a coach, I think that's something he would stick with for a long term, kind of like Gruden was on Monday Night Football. He was there for a number of years, and I don't necessarily think it's a foregone conclusion that he would come back to coaching.
Well, he's going to do something. He indicated that in his press conference. He hates the R word, for sure.
I don't like the word retirement. Mr. B didn't like it either. He always said, retirement's overrated. We get sold this whole image of retirement by these investment groups on TV and golf courses and retirement. And so, I still have a vision for doing things in football. And I'll be honest with you, that might be coaching again at some point. I don't think it's this year. I think maybe in the future, but that's not where my heart is right now. It's not at all.
Shanle, he didn't rule anything out. A lot of these coaches will say never. They'll say, I don't, they just rule things out. He left everything on the table, but something he did say that we didn't play for our listeners here is that he thinks he'd be a good broadcaster. And I don't really know if he would be or not, but I will say this. He'll be more opinionated than what we've seen from Drew Brees so far. And we saw it in his final press conference. I mean, he's calling out the Bengals fans, the who dey chant. That's not the who dat chant. The Bucs may have won, but we beat the Bucs. I mean, he's throwing shade left and right like he always did, even more so on the way out. I wonder if he would do that as a broadcaster, Shanle. And if he does, he'd be a hit.
Yeah, I think he would. That's part of his personality. There's a reason why we kind of, before we won anything in New Orleans, we thought we were good. We walked around with our shoulders back and our heads high because there's an arrogance and a confidence and a swagger that Sean Payton brings. And I think he would bring that to the booth. I think he would be genuine. I think he would be honest. I think he knows where the line is. But like you said in that press conference, taking shots at, we're not rooting for the Rams because they didn't do their part. Eli Manning, or not Eli Manning, Eli Apple. Coach Payton, he knows, he has a pulse on everything, like everything. He knows what's going on everywhere. And I think that's what ingratiates him to fans, is because he's one of them and he takes those subtle shots. So I think he would be really good. I really do. I think once he got in that world, people would love the personality he brought to the booth.
That's why it was the real Sean Payton, because you never really heard him throw shade at a press conference. He would do the Devonta Freeman choke on the sideline. He would talk trash on the sideline, but he would be pretty buttoned up with the media. I think it's greater than 50-50 that he'll coach again, and here's my reason why. Because repeatedly in the press conference, he really enjoys the craft of coaching. I mean, he talked about we're teachers, relationships with players. He loved the relationships he had with the Saints, from the front office, from Mickey Loomis being one of his best friends to even a Jay Romick who runs things behind the scenes. I think he's going to miss that, Shanle. And he may sit out for a year. He may be broadcasting for a little while. I don't think he can completely let go of that. The only caveat, back to your point, is if he ends up really liking the broadcasting gig and knowing that, hey, this is fun and it's not as stressful. So I would put, I'm going to say 70-30 he'll coach, but I see both sides. But I do think he loves coaching so much, it's going to be hard for him to just completely let that go.
Yeah, he's a relationship guy. He cares about his players. And I texted him that yesterday, and I thanked him for everything beyond what he helped us accomplish as football players. Because when we played for him, there's a lot of times where you're like, man, I hate this guy. He's driving us 2 days, 30 days in a row in Jackson, Mississippi. He's always on me about something. And then when you're done, you look back and you realize the coaches who you disliked the most in the moment were the ones you loved the most when you're done. They cared about you. They pushed you. And that side of Sean Payton that I didn't see as a player, that I saw after football, changed my whole perspective on him. I saw the way he interacted with my kids. He come to the Seattle game, you're sitting in the suite, met his family, and after the game, him talking to my kids and telling them what it was like to coach their dad, and your dad was a great teammate, great player, loved coaching him. Like, those things made you realize, like, wow, I wasn't just a jersey number to this guy. And there's so many players that would probably have the same story. And I think that's part of the game he will miss, is the development of players, seeing them accomplish something. He mentioned that. And that is the rewarding side of coaching. And as former players, there's really two worlds you can get in as a former player. Well, three: media, scouting, and coaching. And there's a lot of people that don't like scouting because you don't get those personal relationships with players. He is a people person. He develops people. And so I do think he would miss that part. The only caveat would be, if he sits out, he's got 3 years left on his deal. I think the Saints are going to ask for a haul, like a big-time haul, to let him go out of this contract. First-round picks, compensation, and maybe he does this for 3 years. But by then, he's 61, 62 years old. And does the fire burn to start all over? Do you have your coaching staff you can take with you and start from the foundation like you did in New Orleans? I think that gets tougher the older you get, because it's time. The time requirement to coach football is intensive.
I heard his daughter say recently in an interview that, when they're out at a restaurant, her dad just talks to everybody. He is a people person. I've heard that. And we didn't really see that from a media standpoint unless we got him in the offseason at owners meeting. And I got that. And after a game, you can't be that guy. During the season, you can't be that guy. But I love the authentic Sean Payton. I mean, he was even ripping Mickey Loomis for walking slow. Mickey, pick up the pace a little bit. I enjoyed hearing that too. Shanle, what stands out about Payton, the times he got on you? Was there a point, a practice, or this is story time with Shanle here, Was there a moment where he got on you where you thought, man, what's up with this guy?
Not directly where it was just a chewing out, but
Yeah.
I did get the Sean Payton game day glare a few times. I did get
Yeah?
the, let's go, and then the pat, like, what are you doing? You never want to get on Sean's bad side on game day, because there's a real thing, and it's game day Sean. And if he goes to coach somewhere else, I feel like it's my duty as a former player to warn all those future players he coaches. There's a thing called game day Sean. You don't want to be in the way. You don't want to be in the wrath of game day Sean. So there was never any like just straight chewing out, but there were definitely times where like, man, I'm going to take the long way to the sideline.
Well, you were a part of that 06 team, and he didn't come out and say it, but it felt like that was his favorite team. He loves the 2006 team, obviously his first team in New Orleans. Here's what he had to say about your team, your first team, his first team in New Orleans.
I appreciate that group of coaches and that team, and I still say to this day in 06, we've had a lot of teams, probably teams that are better than the 06 team, but none tougher than that 06 team. None tougher than that 06 team.
You're on a group text with a lot of guys who played in that 06 team. The bulk of that group text is guys who played in that 06 team. What did it mean for you guys to hear that? And what's the reaction with your peers that you played with of Payton retiring? I mean, how do they feel about all this?
It's a badge of honor. I mean, for him to coach as long as he's coached, and to give us a part of that press conference, like, it is a badge of honor. And he labeled us the Junction Boys because of what we went through in Jackson, Mississippi. People have no idea. I mean, we still joke about those training camps taking years off our career. Was it worth it? I think it was worth it because it all culminated. The investment was worth what the payoff was. The payoff was the Super Bowl 44 3 years later, but 2-a-days in pads, 110, 120 degrees real feel on the turf field, just absolutely brutal. And I agree with him. That 2016, we were not the most talented, but man, we had high character guys. We had selfless guys. We had tough guys. And the talent of that team had no business making it to the NFC Championship game. But it was a group of guys, like I said before, after the Atlanta game, we were playing for something more that year. And it was a special group. And you look back and they always say, if you don't win the championship, it's a wasted season. It's certainly not. And I thank Coach Payton for recognizing us as the foundation for what he was trying to get done. And he appreciates us. We went back to the Super Bowl reunion a couple years ago, and he told the same story about some of the guys who weren't there in that reunion that should be there, who were there in the 06 year.
You knew Sean Payton in Dallas, and then you arrive in New Orleans. How was Sean Payton different in New Orleans from what you saw in Dallas?
Oh, man. Night and day. You go from a young guy, right, coaching for Bill Parcells, and it was Bill Parcells was a guy who the fear factor was at 10, always. Coaches, players, if you were in the training room, people came around the corner like, hey, Bill's coming. So if you weren't really hurt, you were hightailing out of there because he wouldn't let you hear the end of it. Like, Bill ran a tight ship. So with that, you talked about we saw the real Sean Payton. I don't think I ever saw the real Sean Payton as an offense coordinator. He was just trying to stay out of Bill's wrath. And then when I got to the Saints and I saw his personality come out as a CEO and as a leader and the way he conducted business, the structure of his program, I knew he was going to be something special. Did I know he was going to be there for 15, 16 years? I didn't know that at the time, but his ability to command a room, his ability to get respect from guys, because what happens is when you're driving guys and you're pushing them and we're in pads again, and guys are moaning and groaning and you don't care because you're trying to build something. Like, there were tons of opportunities for him as a young coach to appease the vets, to appease the holdover guys. He didn't care. I think that's the one thing that I appreciate about him was he was going to do it his way. And if it didn't work, he was going to fail doing it his way. But obviously it did work.
What if somebody would have told you in 2006, even at the height, even when you guys made it to the NFC Championship game, you know what? Peyton's going to be here in 2021.
Well, I'll tell you right now, even if you would have told me that after the Super Bowl, I would have been like, no way.
Yeah.
Just because the longevity of coaches in the NFL is not that. And so that would be the biggest reason, not because he's not a great coach or a great leader. It's just the longevity of guys in the NFL. And the Bill Parcells playbook is the George Costanza playbook. You always leave on a high note, right? You walk and you walk out the room. And so Bill Parcells has been advising him, hey, don't leave when they're ready to kick you out. Always leave them wanting more.
Okay, but this is why I think he's rare, because he has Parcells in him. He has John Gruden in him. He's been around a lot of different coaches, Shanle. But the more we talk about Payton, especially the last 24 hours, there's only one Sean Payton. I mean, he carved his own niche from a risk-taking aspect, from a offensive aspect, and really, here's another tenet to Sean Payton. He would always pick the best man. I go back to Pierre Thomas. Antonio Pittman is drafted in the 4th round out of Ohio State running back. Pierre Thomas severely outplays him in the preseason. He picks Pierre Thomas. You talk to Lance Moore. I mean, you talk to Marcus Colston. They get rid of Dante Stallworth. To me, there are so many layers of Sean Payton that you don't see in other coaches. Yeah, he's part Parcells, he's part Gruden, but there's only one Sean Payton, Shanle. He really carved his own niche.
Well, yeah, and that's that. As players, you respect that because there's a lot of coaches that say things in front of you and they preach things and then they don't mean it. When a coach gets in front of your group from day one and says, I don't care how you got here, I don't care what your contract says, I don't care where your draft status was, I'm going to keep the right 53. And so you're sitting there like, yeah, coach speak, whatever. And then we draft a kid in the 4th round at running back, and there's a guy named Pierre Thomas, undrafted free agent. And we're going through training camp, and this Pierre Thomas guy, I'm like, this guy is unbelievable. We can't tackle him. He runs a screen game as good as anybody I've seen in the NFL. Like, and then we cut the 4th round draft pick, and we keep Pierre Thomas because he's the better football player. And as a veteran, you're like, man, this coach, this is rare in this business. You got rid of a draft pick to keep the better football player. Most people think that makes sense. It doesn't happen in the NFL. People don't give up on draft picks for undrafted players. And as a player, you're sitting there like, it gives you hope. I don't care who you draft. Oh, you came in, you're a little taller than me, you're a little stronger than me, you're a little faster than me. I don't care. Coach Payton says he's going to keep the best player. And so you go out there and you're tougher than that player, you're smarter than that player. And that's why I talk about the type of people that are in that building, and it's a testament to the type of people he kept on his team.
We saw the authentic Sean Payton for sure. One thing I've never seen from Sean Payton, and I have no problem with this, by the way, I've never seen Sean Payton cry. I haven't. And he wanted to make sure he didn't cry, so he Googled how you prevent crying from a press conference. Apparently you drink water and you yawn. He didn't yawn, but I love the sips of water at emotional times in the press conference because you can tell he didn't really need the water, but he's pausing because it's emotional. It got close a few times. I was wondering if he would cry or how emotional he would get, but I didn't know what was going through your mind because there had to be a kind of this is your life moment, Shanle, as a former player, and your former teammates had to feel that way. How emotional is coach going to get? Boy, there were certain moments. Boy, is this going to be the moment? I mean, how were you watching him at that press conference?
Yeah, I thought he was very emotional when he sat down. You could see it. You could see it in his body language. You could see it in his face. And some of that comes with to me, uncertainty. Like, am I making the right decision?
Yeah.
You feel like it's the right decision, but man, you don't know if it's the right decision. You don't know until days, weeks, months, years go by. That's the scariest part. And I'm sure that's what he was feeling yesterday. He went back and forth, and the emotion comes from finally saying it's over to being scared about making sure you're making the right decision.
All right, before we get to a more likely, which you have to stick around for, everybody, some really good questions, good perspective coming up. Who's going to be the next head coach of the New Orleans Saints, Scott Shanle? Who is it?
Dennis Allen. And I think Louisiana mobile betting became live this morning. If I was in Louisiana, I would go Dennis Allen.
I think so too. I think the continuity factor, you have Pete Carmichael on the offensive end. It just kind of makes sense. And it's not like they're settling for Dennis Allen. He's interviewing with other teams. And we've been saying this for a long time, Shanle. He deserves to be a head coach. I live in Tampa and I do a lot of media here. And a lot of people ask me, how has Sean Payton figured out Tom Brady? Well, a big part of that's Dennis Allen. I mean, I think he's been a very underrated part of the resurgence of the Saints since 2017, for sure.
Yeah, he's a great leader. He really is. I was there for the evolution of Dennis Allen as a coach. He was an assistant defensive line coach, just getting the balls for people, setting the balls on the ground, marking, drawing up scout team cards. Then he became the assistant DB coach. Then he became the DB coach for Greg Williams. Then he went on to Denver to be the defense coordinator, which that defense was awesome because Tim Tebow was their quarterback, if anybody remembers. He got a head coaching job for Oakland, and it was Oakland, right? Like, that's a dysfunctional organization. Comes back to the Saints, and think about where the Saints defense has been since 2016 when he took over for Rob Ryan. They have been the strength of this team. And for me, that being said, he's a great coach, but I want to see the fabric of this organization stay together. It's been so strong. You bring in a new guy who brings in all new coaches, that Sean Payton fabric that's been intertwined, it gets pulled apart immediately. I think there are tons of great coaches. Pete Carmichael would be his offensive coordinator. You wouldn't have to make a whole lot of changes. And I think if you went to every player in that locker room and said, would you be happy with Dennis Allen as a head coach? They would all say yes. And if you have that, there's no sense in breaking it up.
How can he be as a leader, though? What kind of leader do you think he will be?
I think Dennis is a really good leader. I think he has a presence about him. And that's something he's acquired over the years as he's coached longer. To stand in front of a defensive meeting room and to get guys to play the way they've played the last 5 years, you don't do that without believing in the guy who's calling the plays. You don't do that without believing in the structure or the culture. You have to create a culture in each room. Linebacker coach creates culture in his room. Defensive coordinator creates culture within his unit. It goes throughout the entire team, all the way up to the head coach. So I think what Dennis Allen has shown us as a defensive, watching his defenses, would be the same type of persona his team would have as a head coach.
All right, good stuff from Scott Shanle. As always, Justin, you know what time it is. You know, as long as we've talked about Sean Payton, his press conference was an hour longer than our podcast so far. He talked and he talked. It was good stuff. I think Saints fans, it was sad, but it was a good trip down memory lane on a lot of fronts there. All right, we bring back Justin Thomas, more likely. I got to throw this out there. The first question, and you guys don't know the questions coming. Of course, I do. The same drill. Who's the biggest loser in Sean Payton retiring? Is it Jameis Winston? Is it Mickey Loomis? Is it Saints fans? Or you could go off the board as you guys do and with great success in past podcasts. So biggest loser in the Sean Payton retirement, Justin. You go first.
I think you got to go with the one that impacts the most people. That's the Saints fans. Clearly, Jameis is probably a loser. I think Mickey Loomis has
I
shown
could
that
pull that out, and it'd be really damning on Jameis. But anyway, just keep going.
Jameis Winston's a loser. That's a soundbite.
But no, I think Saints fans, it sucks. I mean, I'm still kind of going through the 5 stages of grief. I think I'm stuck in depression right now. But it's going to be tough, and I think it's going to be hard for a lot of people, a lot of the players transitioning. But I think fans are the biggest loser in this.
You know, my buddy Fletcher Macklow, sportscaster in New Orleans, I always, when a big story like this happens, I love watching just reaction from everybody nationally, locally. He says something that was really, I thought, impactful of what Saints fans are going through. And he's a New Orleanian, that everybody was leaving New Orleans in 2006, but Sean Payton was entering New Orleans. And then he was one of the few that had that kind of impact. Shanle, first of all, before your answer, how do you help Justin with his grief right now? Can you help him a little bit?
I want to give him hope that Dennis Allen would be a great coach, and he would be there would be tons of obstacles as far as cap number, not having a quarterback. So you got to be patient, I think, a little bit. But I think Saints fans should have hope if this whole thing stays together. I'll remind you this. Sean Payton wasn't on the sideline in Tampa Bay when they won 9-0 and shut down Tom Brady. Let's roll with that staff, right?
Mm-hmm. I like it. Okay, but who's the biggest loser, though? Is it Saints fans? Is it Jameis? Is it Loomis? Or you can go off the board.
I agree with Justin. It's hard not to say Saints fans, but he did a great job of saying why. I think I could go as big as the NFL. Like the NFL is the biggest loser because this guy was a face of your league. This guy was a guy who was not scared to take on your clown commissioner, Roger Goodell. This was a guy who put primetime football, made it fun to watch. Like his record in primetime was amazing. He set all sorts of records for offensive football with Drew Brees. And I think the NFL as a whole, not having Sean Payton in the NFL as a coach is a big loss. If you made me pick a player, I I may go with Taysom Hill. I'm a little worried with what Taysom Hill's going to be able to do without the Sean Payton presence.
Interesting.
Good point too.
Before I give you my answer, I meant to ask you this earlier. Let's just say, because you've always been a proponent of Drew Brees being a head coach. If Drew Brees went to Mickey and said, you know what, I'd like to be in the running for a head coach, and if you were Mickey Loomis, what would you do?
I've always said,
give you the platform, my friend. You've said it for years. Yes.
I think Drew Brees is not only a Hall of Fame player, but I think he could be a Hall of Fame coach. I think he has that DNA in him. He has a command, a respect that when he stands in front of men, they just shut up and they listen to every word. They hang on every word. I think it would be something that Mickey would have to seriously consider. And who's gonna say this guy doesn't have enough experience coaching? This guy, he needs to climb the ranks. He needs to draw up some scout team cards before he's the head coach. I don't think anybody would say that. I think it would be unprecedented. It would be worrisome as far as that goes from the organization standpoint. We're going to make Drew Brees come in when we're kind of quote unquote rebuilding. That would be a tough position for Drew to enter.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be really cool to kind of change the game in that aspect, that you're going to give a player who I think could be a Hall of Fame head coach that platform.
Interesting stuff. My biggest loser is Jameis, and you could say Mickey Loomis, because obviously I think Mickey Loomis did a lot of great things with the cap, but I think Sean Payton to me was the difference maker in so many ways for the Saints since 2006, and Drew Brees. But Jameis Winston, think about this, guys. He comes over and leaves the Bucs and doesn't have a lot of options, but was smart in going to the Saints, learning under Payton, learning under Brees. Then he becomes the guy, starting to get acclimated in the offense, gets hurt, and then he wants to, I would think, come back. You would think. And now Payton's gone. I mean, to me, that is huge for Jameis Winston. I think Taysom Hill's a good point too. But Jameis Winston, what do you think is going through his mind right now, Shanle? Because you invest time the last 2 years with a coach at the level of Sean Payton, and now you're kind of in no man's land somewhat.
Yeah, I'm sure he's worried as long as there's tons of free agents on this team who are now worried as far as what direction they're going to go. But I'm just going to be 100% honest. I don't think it was a foregone conclusion that Jameis Winston was ever coming back.
Yeah.
I think when I watched Sean Payton, I studied his body language on the sideline. There were a lot of tense moments. There were a lot of Sean Payton, game day Sean glares. There was an uneasiness I saw in him when Jameis was playing. Jameis did some really good things. But that part of Sean, when Jameis would double clutch the ball and he was like, oh no, what's going to happen? He won't live very long with a quarterback like that. So I really don't know if they even had any plans on bringing Jameis back. That's not insider information. I do know people who have said, like, yeah, Jameis had Sean on edge. So there's going to be interesting, acquisitions at the quarterback position, whether or not they're going to go forward with Taysom, whether they're going to trade for somebody or draft somebody and just start over with a total rebuild. I don't know, but I don't know if Jameis was ever in the plans to come back.
And how much of an impact do you think that was with Payton, with the uncertainty at quarterback? And Jameis, boy, he had the unenviable task of following Brees, but not having Brees and all the uncertainty at quarterback. What percentage of that was part of Payton's decision, do you think?
I think I'm going to go 60-40 that it played a factor, I do think. And the reason I'm not going to go higher is because I think if you go higher, like that was the main factor, it almost looks like your coach quit on you. And I don't think coach quit on the organization because of the dire straits of the organization. I think he's always relished in challenges, and he was burned out. He just maybe the organization sat him down for those 2 hours and said, Sean, our cap number, we need to seriously address this year. We're going to have to let this guy go, this guy go, this guy go. We're going to look at drafting a quarterback for the future. And if that was the case, I don't know if I necessarily blame him for not wanting to do that at this point in his career.
One thing that I learned in the press conference when you talk about quarterbacks, though, before we get to our second question here, is I thought for a while, he loves Brees, great respect. He even said it, at the press conference, I got to follow Brees with these, there's so much respect he has for Nine. But I think I thought there was a part of Payton that wanted to prove, you know what, I can win without him and I can do it. But I think it was clear after listening to everything at his press conference that really wasn't the case, that it was more than that. Did you get that sense too? I mean, we always talked about this whole season that especially early on. I mean, they're beating the Packers, they're beating the Patriots, they're beating the Bucks. He's showing he can do it without Breeze, and we knew it was more than Breeze too. But I got the sense in that press conference that was never a part of the equation for Payton. It really wasn't.
No, yeah, I thought about that too. Like, what if this team would have squeaked in the playoffs? What if they would have made noise in the playoffs? What if they would have went on and won the Super Bowl? I come to terms with thinking that this moment still would have happened. Anytime a coach says before the season that I had these thoughts, it's no different than a player. Coaches tell players all the time, when you thought about retiring, you've already retired. So I think this moment was going to happen regardless of the success or the non-success of the 2021 team.
All right, second more likely. Is Sean Payton more likely a Hall of Famer? Can you make the case, Justin Thomas?
I started thinking about this as soon as the press conference was over yesterday. You and I talked about this earlier, Mike, and I did a list, or I looked up a list, I should say, of coaches
Here we go.
Shanle, how about Justin with the prep again?
I love it.
Of coaches who have over 150 wins. There's 21 coaches right now.
Wow.
And Sean Payton, I believe, is tied with Pete Carroll. And based on what I saw, I think it looks really good. There's a couple coaches who don't have Hall of Fame that aren't in the Hall of Fame, and I think that's because they didn't win a Super Bowl, even though they had a lot of wins. But Sean Payton has got a win. He's got one Super Bowl. He's got a really good record. And there are coaches underneath him, Bill Cowher being one of them, who is in the Hall of Fame, only has one Super Bowl win, but has less regular season wins and is tied with overall wins with Sean Payton. So I really don't see why not, considering how he changed his organization, an organization that was, if not at the bottom, right near the bottom since its inception, and he's totally turned it around. So I think yes.
All right, Shanle, I think I know your answer, but
Oh, yeah, there's absolutely 100%. There's no doubt in my mind he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. And it's not because of even the head coaching record. If people want to dispute his head coaching record and they think he needs to have more Super Bowls, first of all, you name me one team right now that if Sean Payton said, I will coach for anybody, you name me, maybe a couple teams would say no. There'd be a ton of teams on the phone saying, yes, we want you here.
100%.
That right there says he's a Hall of Fame head coach. But if you want to dispute he didn't win enough Super Bowls or his record as a head coach, how about we look at what he meant to the game of football as an offensive coach? Him and Drew are mentioned right there with Bill Walsh and Joe Montana. What he did for the game offensively as an offensive mind and an offensive play caller, I think if you want to argue the head coaching record and this and that, you can't dispute what he meant to the game as an offensive genius. So to me, he's in the Hall of Fame for sure.
Here's the thing, too. Let me just throw this caveat out there. You know, a lot of coaches lose, like Marty Schottenheimer was a great coach, but he never got to the Super Bowl. Do you think Hall of Fame voters will look at Sean Payton and say, well, the no call, the Minnesota Miracle, he had bad breaks in the postseason. A lot of that was out of his control. I think that kind of help him with voters maybe a little bit, too, or does that not even matter?
Yeah, I don't think it's a bottom line business. So I think when it all said and done, outside of us in Saints world where we remember those plays, I don't necessarily think that anybody else remembers those or cares. I really don't. I think most people are happy you have those problems. Well, it's not my team, so I don't care. Like, I think when it's all said and done, they're going to look at what he meant to the city in his first 4 years, how he put New Orleans back on the map, how he put the Saints, the fleur-de-lis, that logo means something now. And I mentioned this yesterday, real quick. He one day brought into our meeting room, he's like, how many of you guys think the Pittsburgh Steelers are a good franchise? A bunch of hands go up. He puts a stat up, and he shows pre-1972, average. They were not really even a good franchise. Then he shows after they won Super Bowls. And he goes, see, all you guys think that this Pittsburgh Steelers franchise has always been good. He said, you guys go out and win some games, you win a championship, people will look at our logo different. People will look at black and gold different. And I'll never forget it because it's so true. And I mentioned that to him a couple years ago when I saw him. He's like, hey, you remember that story? I'm like, absolutely. It made an impression on me because it's so true.
What year was that? You remember?
I think it might have been 2000. It might have been after the 2008 season. It was before we won the Super Bowl.
Interesting.
So it was a year, or might have even been 2009.
Interesting. Well, here's my thing with Sean Payton. Initially, I thought, maybe he needs another Super Bowl. But when you look at the numbers, and Justin, of course, does the great job prepping, I think Bill Cowher's the one that stands out for me, because if Bill Cowher's in, then Sean Payton's got to be in. And here's why, Shanle. Not only the fact that they have the same amount of total wins, but I really, not to take anything away from Bill Cowher, but I guess I am. Sean Payton's job was a lot harder than Bill Cowher's. Coming into New Orleans, not having as much stability, not only from an infrastructure standpoint in the city, but all the obstacles he faced. I just think the Bill Cowher factor, to me, if you let him in, you got to let Payton in. It's beyond that, but that's enough precedence for me. If you break it down, you think he is in anyway, but I think when you look at a Bill Cowher and you break the numbers down and you also break the circumstances down, that makes the case even greater for Payton.
Yeah, and here's what people that are going to want to overanalyze everything. They're going to do. They're going to say, "Well, Bill Cowher, let's look at his quarterbacks. Neil O'Donnell, Tommy Maddox. Didn't he have Cordell Stewart for a while?
Yeah.
They're gonna try to point to that as a reason why Bill Cowher is a better coach.
Yeah.
But let's be honest. And I found this interesting. Sean Payton brought up the Bill Belichick and the Brady and who deserves more credit. It was almost like he's setting the stage for people to debate his coaching career because of Drew Brees. He brought that up on his own. And it's almost like people need to realize that Drew Brees wasn't Drew Brees before he met Sean Payton. There's a lot of credit to go around, but I don't think you can take anything away from Sean Payton because he had Drew Brees as his quarterback.
Well, and I'll always say this, that, people talk about if Drew would have gone to Miami, Saban wouldn't have gone to Alabama, Reggie Bush probably wouldn't be in New Orleans. They would have drafted a quarterback. Maybe it's Matt Leinart or, Vince Young. But here's my thing, though, Shanle, okay? If Drew goes to Miami, and I will stand by this, I don't care. Drew would have been good, but he would have been greater with Sean Payton. Sean Payton made him a Hall of Famer. I really believe that. I don't know if he would have been a Hall of Famer with Nick Saban. He would have been good, and maybe they would have been, a playoff team and all that. Sean Payton made Drew Brees, and Drew Brees made Sean Payton. It was the perfect marriage. They were good for each other.
Yeah, you need that, and I think it's okay. I think it's okay to say that. But there's so many people that want to take credit from people and give it to others, and have reasons why. Oh, you were only great because. How about they can both be great because of each other? And there's nothing wrong with that. And I made the argument with people about the Brady Belichick thing. I know Brady went to Tampa and won a Super Bowl. He also picked a team with an extremely loaded roster. Okay. So that doesn't take away from his greatness. But would Tom Brady have been Tom Brady if he didn't get drafted to New England? I say no. If Tom Brady had been drafted to the Cincinnati Bengals or the Cleveland Browns or a dysfunctional place,
right,
where he would have been asked to carry a franchise, I don't know if Tom Brady would have ever turned into Tom Brady. So we need people in our lives to bring out the greatness in us.
And how about this? If I'm Jeff Duncan, who represents the Saints in New Orleans and the candidates for the Hall of Fame, I say this if they throw out the Bill Cowher and all the quarterbacks and everything. Okay, we have Matt LaFleur in Green Bay, who I believe set a record for wins in his first 3 seasons in the NFL. You know whose record he broke? George Seifert's record. George Seifert didn't do a whole lot with the quarterbacks in San Francisco that he should have, because he went to Carolina. He was a bust after that. Matt LaFleur hasn't gotten to the Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers. And I know, you can go back and forth, but I think that helps Sean Payton looking at some of that too.
Well, for sure. And I laughed because I just did an interview the other day with somebody who told me to rank Kyle Shanahan, McVay, and LaFleur. And I went Shanahan, who I think is the best coach, then McVay, because I would like to play for him because of his personality, and I had LaFleur last. And they were flabbergasted.
Really?
And I said, I was like, are you kidding? Kyle Shanahan turned Kirk Cousins into Kirk Cousins. Kyle Shanahan turned Matt Ryan into a MVP. Yeah. Should have won 2 Super Bowls if he would have just ran the ball, which Kyle didn't. And I say that because I think in Green Bay, if there's any place that you can make a point for needing a coach to prove he can win without a quarterback, it's probably Matt LaFleur.
Interesting. All right, last one. Really an open-ended, more likely question, Justin Thomas. What will you miss most, more likely, about Sean Payton?
You know what I miss, and it's kind of a combo. it was something that him and Breeze would do. I always miss. It was somewhere in the game. The game was maybe on the line. He would call a timeout, and him and Drew Brees were on the sideline talking. What should we do? Should we do this? Should we go for it on fourth down? What, you think this play will work? Sean would kind of have that smirk, and then he'd be like, "All right, Breeze, if you're fine with it, let's go with it." I'm gonna miss that, and I think that goes with, at the end of the day, even after Breeze was gone, knowing that Sean Payton was on that sideline, I always felt like we had a chance. I always felt like there was something up his sleeve that no one knew was coming, was unexpected, and then we would pull it off, and Sean would look like a genius. And so, I do have hope for the future. I agree that Dennis Allen will probably be the head coach, and I'm not all doom and gloom. I'm excited, but I do think it was always nice knowing that Sean Payton, as long as he was on the sideline, the Saints had a chance.
When we did our last show with Drew Brees, I agree with you 100%, Justin, because I brought up to him the thing that stands out about Drew, and this is Sean too, because at the time we didn't know Sean was leaving, but you can kind of put them together in this. I don't care if it was 3rd and 5 or 3rd and 10 or 3rd and 18. You always felt like you had a shot. And before you get to your answer, Shanle, I'm sure being a defensive player on the sidelines, watching the offense, seeing Peyton and Breeze, and hearing a lot of the stuff. Do you understand, the thoughts of Justin right there and what he appreciated?
Yeah, for sure. So it's like two mad scientists, two chemists getting in a lab. And like Justin said, when those two got together and put their heads together, you felt like it was going to work. You never felt like, oh my gosh, this ain't going to work. They're not going to convert this 3rd down. You always felt like you had a chance when number 9 and Sean Payton got together and were talking.
Especially that Miami game, your Super Bowl year, when that was a pivotal 4th down play.
Oh, wow.
And you guys had to get that to really set the momentum for the second half. Just so many examples of it. But Shanle, overall, and we've broken down Sean Payton from 2006 to yesterday's press conference. What will you miss the most about your former coach?
It's simple. I'm gonna miss him as the face of our franchise. I'm gonna miss tuning in and watching him pace up and down that sideline. MFing referees, pointing at refs and telling them to come here. I want to talk to you. I'm gonna miss the visor, he's our logo for the Saints. When you think of the Saints, you think of Sean Payton, the visor standing there on the sideline, and you don't want to say party organization died, but people tuned in to watch Sean Payton. The arrogance he brought, the swagger, the attitude. Recently, he's dancing in the locker room with the players at the end, in the locker room. There's so much that I'm going to miss about him, and because I played 2012 during his suspension, I know you go the first month, 2 months, 3 months, and it's business as usual. But then you start missing having him come in and chew you out. You miss having him come in and telling you exactly how you're going to win the game, who's going to mess up on their team, what little intricate detail is going to be the reason why you win or lose a game. Those things just kind of fade away over time. And so there's a part of me that's sad because he is the face of our franchise.
It's almost like you can have a substitute teacher in school, Shanle, but then you have a professor you really respect, and you got to bring it every day. Was that the feeling with Sean Payton as a player?
Yes, that is a great way. That is a great way to say it. And you know what the expectations are. You know what the culture's already produced. But it is human nature to take a shortcut. It is human nature to exhale. And Sean Payton never let you exhale. And that's what made him great. That's what made him bring the greatness out of all of his players. Is every day you stepped in the building, you felt like you had the edge. You felt like you had an edge on every team because you had the better coach. And that's what they're going to miss the most.
What I will miss about Sean Payton is I don't, whether they won, whether they lost, I don't care what the game was. And really the whole offseason, Sean Payton was never boring. I've covered some boring people in sports. I've covered some boring teams and certainly some boring coaches. Sean Payton, you were never boring, not 1 second. And, sometimes from a media standpoint, I would wonder why you would call guys, and even you, reflected on that in your press conference, that you were too hard on the media and you had greater appreciation for the media. Maybe Shanle, that's because he's going to be in the media and he's going to be hanging with us soon, like Jim Mora is in the press box at the Superdome. But Sean Payton, you were never boring. And, you guys made great points about the offense and the creative play calling. And I'll just throw in the onside kick. And it was almost something different every week with him from a game planning standpoint. So he was never boring. And, we've talked for almost an hour, and Sean Payton talked an hour and a half, saying goodbye to everybody. It won't be the same in New Orleans. He'll be a legend forever. And Shanle, I can't imagine Sean Payton will ever have to buy any alcohol, whether it's a hurricane or a beer, if he goes anywhere the rest of his life.
No, he would be well served to stay in New Orleans. I think he moved out of his town or his house. He's moving to a condo. I think stay in New Orleans. You'll never pay for another meal or drink. You have it made. Fly to your TV gigs. Tell the Cowboys fans to shut up and enjoy your time.
Now that's a way to end it. Justin, where are we on Twitter?
At Done Dead Podcast.
And check us out on all the platforms. We're going to be with you the entire crazy offseason for the New Orleans Saints. We'll be back when they hire a coach or when anything big happens with the Saints. We're going to touch on it. So subscribe to us. Follow us on Twitter, please. Give us suggestions on potential guests you'd like us to bring in or subject matter. Shanle always has great subject matter and stories. And Shanle, I don't even know if you realize it, but we talked about Sean Payton. We've talked about Sean Payton for years. And I think the sad thing for me is we always kind of found it amazing that after all these years, we're still talking about a guy you played for. Hopefully DA gets the job and you'll still be able to continue that theme moving forward. But I thought one of your best stories was that Steelers story and the perspective that he brought with the steel curtain to the black and gold. So that's what you get with this podcast. So please subscribe and tell your friends. And even if they're not Saints fans, we'll touch on football as well. So for Scott Shanle, for Justin Thomas, for the last time as Saints, Sean Payton is the head coach. I'm Mike Nabors. We'll talk to you down the road.